All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to We Are Libertarians. My name is Chris Spangle. Thank you for joining us today. We have a special guest. This is Dion Curry, my co-host over at the Patdown podcast. He also hosts, co-hosts Now That's Debatable and Sorry We're Canceled, and we're going to talk about Black History Month. So we'll get started with that in just one moment.
Warning. This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. If you struggle to understand politics, we explain it from an independent libertarian point of view. With all of the irreverence it deserves, we toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, Chris Spangle, a 15-year veteran of politics and media.
You're listening to the Chris Spangle Show, and I am Chris Spangle. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show. If you're new to all of this and you don't know who the heck I am, you can check us out. Check me out at chris-spangle.com. Before we start, I want to thank all of the members of WAL Plus, WAL Plus, as they're the reason the show and network exist. And you can support the show by visiting joinwalplus.com, and you'll learn about all of the great benefits of subscribing. Thank you especially to our $100 a month members, John Pusilo, Casey Feldposh, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Jeff Bennett, Rhinehold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. Thank you to every WAL Plus subscriber for keeping the We Are Libertarians podcast network thriving. So many great shows on the network. The Brian Nichols Show, On the Run, Gingerarchy, On the Run with Rimzo Martinez, Gingerarchy with Trisha Stewart-Mann. So many great shows. Check all those out at wearelibertarians.com. Today, we are joined by Dion Curry. No, I have not replaced Harry with Dion, and I almost said, Harry, how's it going? But I know that'd be offensive, Dion.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And then Rhinehold is also here. Rhinehold, how are you?
I'm doing well.
So Dion and I, and Harry will be along any minute now, I'm sure. He's just running. He's running behind. He's got a toddler. It's just, I'm sure it's a mess over there right now. So Dion and I are co-hosts on the Patdown podcast with Miss Pat. We met through the comedy circuit. And Dion, before we met, and you just watched my social media, what was your opinion of me? And I want you to be brutally honest today. Everything we talk about, tell the people what you thought about my libertarian ass.
So it's funny, like we have like semi-mutual friends, and all of them hated you because of your stance on teachers' pay. You and I don't think had ever really had a more than, hey, how are you conversation in person, meeting at the comedy club. So I had only known you through your posts about what was going on in the news or your takes on politics. So back then I didn't really pay you that much of an attention. It wasn't until Miss Pat like brought us together that I was like, oh, this guy's a real asshole.
Why was I never tried to be an asshole to you.
No, that's not what I mean. Like your point of view to me came off as someone who didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I actually got to know you that I understood your point of view and where you come from. And I was like, oh, he's not an asshole. He just doesn't know the other side of it.
Yeah. So like, for instance, I want teachers to be paid a ton of money. I just don't like teachers unions, so it's if you don't pay attention, I think sometimes, especially for those of us who come from the right or are libertarians, when you're talking to somebody who may identify more at the left, and vice versa. I mean, there's always misunderstandings, but like when we first met, and it's Black History Month, which is, and this whole episode was Harry's idea because he's like, you know what we should do? Let's talk Black History Month with Dion. I wanted to have you on for a while, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. And, but you actually wake up and you watch the show, do you not? You watch almost every weekend, it seems like.
If I don't catch it live, I definitely watch it on replay.
Yeah, and you should definitely go check out Now That's Debatable, which is a really great show where they talk politics, and it's really solid podcast. And as well, check out the Patdown podcast. I mean, that's where Dion and I met and have gotten to know each other, and it's the funniest podcast on the planet. Like 85-90% of that's Miss Pat, but Dion and I are funny too. And through that podcast, we've had a lot of conversations about race, both off air and on air, over the last 2 years. Yeah, here's Harry. Where are you at, bro? He can make it onto the Twitch stream, but he can't make it onto the StreamYard here.
I talked to him last night. He was like, "Yeah, I get up early for the podcast." So I don't know what happened.
He's pulling the old CP time.
Oh, Harry, I'm so sorry. It's not his fault. I sent it to Facebook instead of Slack. So once again, this is my fault. I did not send it the normal place, so he's just sitting there thinking, "Wow, what an a-hole."
Place. Yeah, the special place that he demands it be placed.
I forgot. I was way ahead of myself today. My ADD kicked in. There we go. All right. Sorry, Harry. I will make a public apology to Harry when he arrives. Yeah, I mean, I think my views on race, I didn't think about it, and I didn't have to.
Exactly.
I think that's where it's not that I was racist. I never harbored any negative feelings towards any people of color. It's just just wasn't in my concern, right? Like, I think most people tend to be concerned with what's right in front of them and what affects them, and they don't think about how that affects the people or if other people have concerns necessarily. And so, being a part of the Patdown and talking to tens of thousands of Black people for 2 years on a daily basis, I've learned a lot and grown a lot, I think. And I think our conversations have helped you in a lot of ways too. I mean, when I listen back to some of those first episodes where we talk about race, I was terrified because, Dion, I didn't know how to talk about race, and I didn't particularly want to because I didn't want to be thought of as a racist.
Right. Hey,
well,
there he is.
Look who it is.
Speaking of racists, hi, Harry. No, just kidding.
Harry, it sounds like your mic may be on the computer mic, but I'd like my Black co-host to meet my other Black co-host. Harry was like the first person who brought race into my field of vision, because Harry and I have never talked about that kind of stuff. But like when we did, we finally started talking about it. I started to see like my view of the world or the way that I operate in it is much different than Harry's. I mean, Harry, we had a conversation about police brutality after Ferguson, and you go, I am scared when I leave my house every single time.
Yeah. You think, because you have to. It's just a different mindset. Like I remember, like one time, I got pulled over for speeding, and I just had my gun in my hip, and when I got pulled over, I was like, well, this is it. I'm done. I'm going. This is how I'm going. And and I'm sitting there with the cop, and he goes like, just give me your ID. I'm like, my ID is in my wallet. Well, grab it. My gun is in my hip. I'm not. I'm sitting there just petrified in fear. Like, yep, this is how I'm going. Back road of Indianapolis, just done.
And I've never, until about a year and a half ago, never had that experience with a police officer. But we want to talk about Black History Month, and we're going to start with a story on it. But I wonder, what do you two think of Black History Month? Like, I've heard arguments that it's condescending, it's like the shortest month, and then there's talk like, no, we need to have these conversations. Like, do you have opinions on Black History Month? Dion, we'll start with the guest.
Yeah, I mean, Black History Month wasn't a Black person's idea. Like, so that's why it happens in February. They always try to say, "Oh, it's because of Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln and all these birthdays," and it's like, no, that's not. Come on, guys, like, don't bullshit us. Of all the months of the year, why the fuck would you pick February? It's the shortest, it's the coldest. Black people hate being cold. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It literally makes no sense. For me personally, Black History Month has always been kind of like let's learn about these 4 same people for 12 years and, make a difference. And it's like, come on, man. How many times do I have to hear the Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, and, Booker T. Washington? So like, come on.
Oh, in Plainfield, we never even got to Booker T. Washington, or you got George Washington Carver.
Which people get him and Booker T. Washington confused all the time.
We did actually in high school talk about Marcus Garvey, and that's when I was like, all right.
That's surprising to me to hear that Plainfield was talking about Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, so Plainfield's 98% white and 2% Muslim. And then when Miss Pat and her family moved to Plainfield, like they quadrupled the black population in my hometown. I grew up in a very suburban town, and what I've come to learn about suburbs, and maybe not in Indianapolis necessarily, but in a lot of like established eastern cities, especially when you had second generation immigrant, third generation immigrant families like the Irish who had settled in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They had become more successful. And then once black families moved in the Great Migration to their neighborhoods, they said, see ya, I'm out of here, and moved to the suburbs and set up the suburbs. And that's the culture that a lot of us grow up in, is a 98% white town without the same concerns. And so you don't have conversations with people of different cultures or colors or religions. My experience with that 2% Muslim population after 9/11 forever changed my view. And I saw the bigotry firsthand after 9/11, towards my Muslim classmates and best friends after they had grown up with us. My best friend saying about my other best friend, he's got nuclear weapons in the bottom of his mosque in Plainfield. I'm like, what? These guys, like, what are you talking about? So it's, I think that's part of the problem, is that we've separated ourselves and don't have conversations like we've been able to have on the Patdown. Harry, what do you think about Black History Month?
Dion's right. No black person would have picked February. This was just to placate the dark people. So they like, look, we gave you a month because we probably would have took June or July, something we could get outside, maybe have a picnic on. But no, that's this cold month. The one thing it does, I say, like, it just allows people to I try to use this whole month to reflect, because you can get a lot of white people really wanting to listen to you this month, and you can actually explain. All right,
so let's move on to the next. Just kidding, Harry. Go on.
Talk and bring up other parts of the history, and then so they don't because especially a lot of white people, they like to rabbit hole and not want to go past 1963 and wants to talk about everything else that happened before that. There's some bad and there's some good things that happened before that, and it's good to talk about those things, and then also understand that Black history also doesn't start in the Americas. There's other things that black people did in the ancient world in the 1500s and 1400s over there in the quote unquote old world. So
this takes us to Maria Montessori Academy in North Ogden, Utah. And there was a letter sent out to all the parents with an opt-out form for parents to fill out because they didn't want to teach their kids Black history and Black History Month. And several families actually signed the form, and this form was filled out because many of the parents were offended that Black History Month was being taught at the schools. This sounds like critical race theory to me, Dion. So it got reversed after the NAACP got involved, but I never in my Black History Month was celebrated at Plainfield where I grew up. And of course, yeah, you're right. We learned about Harriet Tubman. We learned about Frederick Douglass. We learned about Lincoln freeing the slaves. You didn't get into Lincoln being a white supremacist, but you learned you learned all these great moments in history where we let them become free, right? You learn about Martin Luther King. It's from a certain condescending point of view, and it doesn't get into what Harry's talking about, which was, the long lineage of Black people. And now there is a conversation going between the 1619 Project and the 1776 Project and the critical race theory and cancel culture and all this stuff. It just seems to me in a lot of ways these while there are some decent points in some of it, there's also a lot of like excuses to get out of having difficult conversations. When you guys hear that Black History Month is being canceled at a school because it's offensive, like, what are your first thoughts, Dion?
Why go out of your way to show you're racist? Like, why, why would you be against learning American history just because it's Black? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Harry, what about you?
Yeah, it's more of I don't know, like if it's part of a curriculum, no, it's just racist. No, I was trying to stick up for it, but no, I don't understand it. It's more of a just they have the opportunity to grow and be better, and they decide to go a different route unless they want to show something that they're not doing. They're doing something better for it, but they're probably not. They're probably just not want to do it because they don't want to ruffle some sensibilities.
Yeah, Dion, I mean, you've talked a lot about this. Like, why would you hide from knowledge?
Yeah, it's an emotional cost that a lot of people don't want to pay, because when you have to accept the ignorance that you've held your whole life, it can weigh on you. It's a hard thing to learn that, oh shit, I've been doing life wrong for a very, very long time. Like, people's natural reaction to that new information is to shut down. I don't want to go through these feelings of guilt and anger and hurt and sadness because this is what I've known my whole life, and now you're telling me that it's been wrong. And if you don't believe that you've done anything wrong, then absolutely it comes as a great shock and offense to you. What I don't understand about this school in particular is what reason would you have to not want to know that knowledge? It doesn't cost you anything. It's not hurting anyone. You're actually disenfranchising your own children by not teaching them the actual history of this country when it comes to their peer group. I mean, at some point you're going to meet a Black person, hopefully. I would hate for somebody to live their whole life in America and not ever once meet a Black person.
You could, and you kind of make this point in the most recent episode of Now That's Debatable. Like, my great grandparents, born in 1913, lived in Southern Indiana, came to Indianapolis in the 1970s, are on an elevator with my dad. So in the 1970s, by this point, they're in their 50s, 60s, near 70s. And a Black guy walks on the elevator. And my great grandmother leans over and goes, "Miles, there's a Negro." And my dad said that was the first time they had ever met a Black person. And you could kind of get away with that maybe in like the early 1900s, but like in the information age, Dion, it's a lot harder to hide from all of this stuff.
Yeah, it's because it is everywhere, but at the same time, if you don't have the mindset for it, if you don't have the care for it, then it's not going to be something that you seek out. What I always try to tell people is accept who you are and own who you are. Don't lie to people about who you are as a person. When you get information, it's your responsibility to do with it what you're supposed to. If I tell you, hey, this thing is happening that you didn't know about before, you get that information. Now it's on you to either A, go research it, or B, deny it. You can do whichever one you like, but if you are going to deny it, you have to own that and you have to stand by it. If you're going to be one of those people say, oh, that's not true, but you didn't do any research on it and you didn't take the time to go find out why you think it's not true, then you have to own everything that comes with that, and that's including the labels. That's what really pisses me off about people. It's like, oh, you can't label me a racist. I'm like, why? You're doing racist things.
So give us an example of like seeing information, ignoring it, being willfully ignorant. The whole Black Lives Matter police brutality thing is a prime example. People say, oh, the statistics say that white people get killed by police more. I'm like, the problem is police brutality. It doesn't matter who they're brutalizing. Like, see, you took it because you heard it was Black people and you dismissed it because you think it happens to white people more. And like that's the point. It does happen to white people more, but you guys don't have a problem with it the way we do, because it doesn't affect your life the way it affects ours. The trauma that police brutality creates for Black people is something that affects all their relationships. Why is it more impactful?
Because one, you're targeted. Two, you're supposed to be able to trust these people, and you can't. Three, it's a learned fear. It's a learned fear based in racism. Like it's just another reminder of who you are in this country. Like they don't see you as Americans, they see you as Black Americans, and that's the life that we have to live until people get on board and like, yo, we need to change this.
Either one of you, Rhinehold, you can jump in too. We'll allow the white man to speak too if you'd like, but Harry, you first.
No, because it's just the same thing. Just like while cops like busting people for marijuana, it's easy to pick out. It makes the same thing easy for them. All right, let's go get that dark guy over there. He usually sticks out like a sore thumb, and with all the different rules and regulations in place, it's easy to find a law that person broke to get him out of here, or just to help out their quotas. You know, you can look at all the different statistics, and people can look at it. But yes, white people are impacted by police brutality too, and they should be also equally upset about it, just like people like who have like mental disabilities, people who are handicapped. They also get impacted by this exact same system. And I understand that some people get turned off with the term, let's just saying Black Lives Matter and going after police brutality. I get it. I also don't like the idea of just putting the word black in front of it. Because it is very jarring and tries to make a separated line. But I just want people to focus on the main issue, that like police brutality is something that does happen in the way that laws are enforced, in the way the cops come at people. It's the main reason. Like I'm living in a small town here in Indiana. You know, I think one of the first things I would try to do was try to make sure my tags said I belong in that small town, because before it did, I got pulled over like 3 different times coming out here. You know, and trying to show like, no, I own a house out here. I'm coming out here for this reason. You know,
yeah, because you moved out to a suburb. I mean, you were kind of in an inner city suburb, like it's a suburb, but like it's not a suburb. It's within the loop. But like you moved out to a suburb, like 20 minutes outside of where you were, right?
Correct. Yeah. I'm tucked into a little small town outside of a larger town now. You know, it's. Most people just use it to get to other towns, or they're going to somewhere else. It's a
so
very,
you've seen an uptick since you moved out to a wider area, an uptick in the amount of times you get pulled over.
Correct. Now it has gone down. Now that they know, now that I've got my ID and everything else supposed to says that I'm there, and that people are now they're kind of used to me. But before that, no, it was like, why am I here? Even when they would go look at the house, I pulled into the driveway to go look at the house, and the next thing I knew, the police went through the neighborhood twice, going around the block, watching me sit at this house.
Yeah, so you have a higher burden to prove of your existence than Rhinehold and I would.
Yes.
Dion, I saw you nod your head.
Yeah, absolutely. You're guilty until proven innocent if you get that chance. It's a weird way to live. Honestly, it's a very weird way to live. I remember the police conversation with my dad when I was a kid. You know, this is what you do. Make sure your dome light's always on. Yes, sir. No, sir. You know. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. That conversation is real. That you guys probably never had that conversation with your parents.
No, my parents never. I mean, I don't know about you, Rhinehold, but police were just not a thought for us. You know, living in Plainfield, it was a very safe community. It was very insulated. You know, it was like the only time that you were to be afraid was if you were in a black part of town. I'm not kidding you. I'm telling you the truth. Like that was the only time. Like you weren't afraid of police. You know, we got off the exit one time in our Lincoln Town Car in 1997 and drove through the south side of Chicago, and you're being told put your head down because we might get shot. Well, what kind of message does that teach you about black people? If that's the only time that you ever interacted with the black community is when you're driving through it and you lock your doors. Like that tells you should be afraid of the color of Dion's skin, of Harry's skin. Like, I think that's a very real example of, you know, I mean, did you guys have anything analogous to that where is it the police conversation? Like if you see a police officer, you should be afraid?
It wasn't necessarily that you should be afraid. It was more of be careful because they could get away with doing things to you, whether you were guilty or not. So it was more of be aware of where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, and know what these people are capable of. It wasn't necessarily be afraid of this person. It was just be aware that there's a higher chance of shit hitting the fan because of police being around.
Yeah, we were always taught, like, if you're in trouble, go to a police officer, run up to them, dare coming in and talking to you. And, the interactions with the police officers was like watching an episode of Blue Bloods. Everybody's there to help. And it's, it's a totally different mindset that we had towards state authority than you had, so it doesn't just extend to police. So Dion and I have talked about this concept called code switching, which I didn't know until he talked about it with me. Can you explain code switching? What does that mean?
So basically it's whitening yourself up to make white people feel comfortable with your blackness. It's not using slang in front of them. It's being quote unquote professional. It's just a way to navigate white spaces without ruffling feathers to make white people feel more comfortable with your blackness, basically.
I mean, Harry, is that something that you just are you? Like, I don't know that but I don't know. Are you different in different groups?
No, I am who I am. I get accused of that a lot. That like you're just doing that so to appease the white people in your space. You make white people comfortable, and that's why they like being around you. I am who I am. I am just a black guy who's a huge nerd, and I grew up in these areas. This is just how I am. I'm not, I don't swear that much, and I don't really use that much slang. It's just what I do.
Yeah. So,
well, another example of that stuff are people who change their names, right? Or try to use names that sound more white than what they might have been given. Things like that. Little things that they do that I've heard happens a lot in that community, just because they want to be able to get a job. And sometimes when you appear a certain way on a job form, but with your name or something, that there's a feeling that gets put aside, and they've done studies that shows that happens, right? So people apply for the job to test out whether or not they get callbacks with two different names, and everything else is identical on there. And the more white sounding name is the one that gets called back, and the other one doesn't. So
I think that was Malcolm Gladwell. Was it Malcolm Gladwell or Freakonomics that wrote about that?
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but it might have been Freakonomics.
Making white people comfortable. I guess, Dion, that's something that I never thought about, like, white people being comfortable or uncomfortable, but comfort seems to be a high value for white communities, does it not?
It's the most important thing to white people is their comfort level. When you move white people out of their comfort level, they shut down immediately. They either rage or they cry. It's one of the two. Because they don't know how to operate being uncomfortable, because everything is designed to keep them comfortable. That's just the way the U.S. system operates. Is if a white person has a problem, they usually can voice their opinion about it, and it gets changed immediately. And if it doesn't, then you got people storming the Capitol, because they usually don't have to operate within the same confines as everybody else. I mean, look at all these Karens who call the police on people who are just trying to barbecue or checking their mail or whatever. It's like, oh, this person's making me feel a certain type of way. Somebody needs to do something. And so, the authority comes in, and it reassures them, hey, we understand you're uncomfortable. We will remove this uncomfort from you so you can return to your normal operating status.
Harry, what do you think?
All right, so I don't. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I see that, especially like when I first started like my professional career. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I have a lot of bass in my voice. And I remember like I was told that I was making some of the people uncomfortable. Like they feel like I'm yelling at them or I'm being aggressive or condescending. I'm like, No, either you know what you know or you don't, and yeah. So I always try to like talk. It's like in my beginning of my career, I was trying to talk softer and softer to like.
That's a code switch.
Yeah, to not appease these people around them, to understand that okay, they are, I just don't want people to understand.
Would
like,
anybody, Rhinehold, nobody has ever said anything other to me that you have a nice voice. Like nobody has ever had that conversation where you're like, I'm making people uncomfortable. Like the dangerous black man, is that sort of like the root of that? Is that people just assume that because you're black, you're a dangerous man?
Who are you asking?
Dion, go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, the stereotypes are what drive most people's fears because they have no experience. So if all you know about somebody different is the stereotypical things that you've learned through TV and books and people talking to you, then of course that's going to be your first mode of operating. So Harry is talking about his voice. So when you first started doing the Patdown with me and Pat, we would be animated, we would be loud. And it was clearly visible that you were uncomfortable with that environment.
Because I thought you were yelling at me.
Exactly. And to us, we're like, no, that's just how we talk. It doesn't mean we hate you. It doesn't mean, it's just a way of being animated. And that's a cultural thing.
Right.
And so.
Well, let me touch on that, because in my world, like the way that Miss Pat talks to me is like, in the way that I grew up in, like my white family, if my mom talked to me the way that she talks to me, I'd be in trouble. I'd be a bad person. Like I'd be less, so I took it as, man, they really don't like me, and then, it took a period of weeks for me to kind of go, no, that's not the case. They talk to you because they like you. I mean, it takes, and that's where I think, having friends of different cultures, it helps you have a different perspective and understand things differently, because I was really uncomfortable and I thought like less of myself because of those interactions. Right. And that's where it all comes from. I was uncomfortable because I thought I was like being just this racist asshole, and you guys, and maybe I was, and that's why I was making you angry. But I think that fear and that discomfort is what keeps a lot of white people from having those conversations, because when you're on that side and you don't want to have those conversations, like being called a racist is like you're told by all these cancel culture types and the intellectual dark web types, like to be called a racist is to be black hold or memory hold from society, and it's all over. And there's like, if you engage in these conversations, the woke crowd is going to ruin your life and snatch everything from you. So you better just keep your mouth shut and not even have those conversations. And then, so when you go into those conversations, it's really uncomfortable because you've been taught and conditioned to think that talking about race with a black person is an existential threat to you. And that's why I look at a lot of this cancel cultural stuff with a skeptical eye now, because I realize some of that is just to prevent these kind of conversations from happening. And it's taken to a point where it's an excuse. It's an avoidance tactic to have a conversation and go through that period of discomfort. I mean, Dion, those first 6 months of the Patdown was uncomfortable for me, because I've never talked about race in my life. And all of a sudden I'm talking about race in front of tens of thousands of people. Right. I'm still uncomfortable with it a lot of times because, you go look at the YouTube comments, there's people that called me a racist. It's like, I'm not a racist. I'm trying to learn. It's just, I don't know how to have these. I don't have the words.
Right. So, people fear what they don't understand. And if you don't understand something, it's on you to figure out why you don't. So I think, you made a good point about people being afraid of being canceled, but at the same time, you don't necessarily, you have to own what you do. So you have to own not knowing, you have to own your ignorance. I think that's what is a big misunderstanding when people say, oh, they're trying to cancel me. It's like, well, they're canceling you because you're not, one, owning what you did, and two, you're not trying to make amends for it. You're just saying you're a victim of something that you yourself did. And it's like, So you have to own what you did, and then you have to correct what you did. You have to show remorse for what you did. And if you don't do those things, then of course people aren't going to forgive you. Now, I will admit that the internet and social media heightens things sometimes way more than it needs to be. They make things a much bigger deal than they actually are in reality. And so again, I understand, people not wanting to have the conversation, but at the end of the day, you become a better person by moving out of your comfort zone to expand your comfort zone. You can't grow as a person if you never plant seeds elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's part of the frustration too, is that really, I think we just want people to understand that the situations exist. Like the experiences that they live through are real. They're not made up. They're not some sort of scam or some sort of cathedral propaganda technique. These are real things that are happening to people. And once you see it happening, once you witness it and accept that it is happening, that's the majority of the battle. Right now, we just got too many people who just are shut down and refuse to even consider that this stuff is still going on, that there's actually systemic racism.
Dion, you made a great point talking about QAnon. People will get mad about things that they've never experienced in their lives.
Yep. So again, people, I heard I got new information. What do I do with it? And it's like, well, it's on you to figure out why you believe what you believe. That's when I turned 18, I did a lot of soul searching. Because I was very religious as a kid, and as I got older, I was like, this just doesn't seem right to me. And so I started doing research, like, why do I believe what I believe? And it's like, oh, because somebody told it to me and I cared about that person. And it wasn't until I actually dug deeper, it was like, oh, there's more information that they're not telling me. And I'm having experiences that are contrary to all the things that I've been taught. So I had to make a decision. Do I just continue to be uncomfortable and live that lie, or do I go and dive deeper into a space that I don't know? Seeking understanding will make you feel so much better because it gets rid of the fear. If you don't have to be afraid of something, and you can learn from it and you can understand it, you feel so much better as a person. So for all these people out here who, dismiss the systemic racism because they don't see it, it's like, you have to ask yourself, well, why don't you see it? Why don't you know anybody who's experienced racism? What is happening in your life for you to hear this information year after year after year, and yet to you it doesn't exist, it's not real, it's made up? People need to stop bitching and complaining about it because it doesn't happen in your world.
Yeah, I think that's like the key. We'll believe QAnon all day long and these conspiracies that are factually untrue, even though we've never seen that. But you can talk to literally any black person in your life, and they'll tell you systemic racism is real, and then you'll go, "That's not true." I mean, Harry, you wanted to jump in before Rhinehold so rudely cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's also good, shows the power of being called, like how powerful that tool is calling someone a racist. I think a lot of the Twitter mobs or the mobs online, they also don't allow some people to come back from it. Like no matter what a means or apologize they do it is shown, it's never shown that someone can come back and learn and educate. But that happens with the mob when you with your friends and you're having conversations, and as long as you have good faith with this conversation and you're with a friend, these conversations are very important to have. But the big thing is make sure make sure they understand that you're a friend, and these questions are coming from a good place. That I have questions, I believe these things, they could be false. Can I explain them? Because if they sit inside, they're just going to get poisoned. Have them come out, let it have the light of day, and have true and real conversations. It's okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of what happened to Chris and I. Like, I didn't care for Chris at all when we first started doing the Patdown podcast. I could take it or leave it. It wasn't that I hated him. It was just like I was indifferent. I didn't really give a shit about his growth experience. And it wasn't until Pat was like, I think he's got a good heart, that I actually was like, okay, she thinks he's a good person, so I will give him the benefit of doubt. And then I learned, it was like, oh, he is a good person. He hasn't experienced what we've experienced. And so that was the basis of most of your talking points is from a place of inexperience. And that's what I always find, like when you have these race conversations with people, a lot of times they have zero experience in what they're actually talking about. And so it skews the information that they give you. It's like, oh, how can you be an expert on something that's never happened to you? How can you deny something that's never happened to you? Because if you have no experience with something, why would anybody listen to your take on it? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I needed, I think it sucks that you have to have these uncomfortable conversations, both of you. I mean, Harry and Dion. But if you didn't take the time and effort, I wouldn't grow as a person, and I wouldn't be doing this show. I'd still be doing the same old shit that I was doing before, and we'd be talking about, Gina What's-Her-Face being canceled, even though she has a new movie deal with Ben Shapiro, and apparently cancel culture's dead. Like, we'd be ranting and feeling like victims on this show instead of having this conversation in front of thousands of people. If you, and Dion, I think from your perspective, where you kind of saw through that experience, like, I have to be somewhat uncomfortable too and talk about things I don't necessarily want to have to be reminded of.
You have to check your anger for people's ignorance. Like, I'm 36. I met you 2 years ago. So I was 34. And I was like, how can we be this age and you don't know shit? Like, that really bothered me, because it's like, I've had to deal with it. Why haven't you had to deal with it? Everybody says we're equal. Everybody says but we're not equal. We're not the same. And it's frustrating to have to teach somebody what your life experience, what your whole life has been like. And for them to not get it immediately is a very frustrating thing. But in order for me to be a better person, I have to set an example, right? So if you come to me with questions, I don't help myself or any person that you meet after me that's like me. I don't help them by just shutting you down and treating you like shit. So at some point, we all have to get in that same room and talk to each other. And we have to let the feelings of discomfort and distrust and anger, we have to let all that go in order to grow as a group. If we have to suffer that together, if I have to spend another half hour of my life being uncomfortable with a white person and explaining to them what racism is like and the things that they need to be aware of, then in the long run, it's going to help me if I'm trying to create allies. And that's what I try to tell people all the time. If you're trying to create allies, you have to navigate where they are. I mean, like you, it took a while for you to get more and more comfortable. You're still getting more and more comfortable.
I'm still not totally comfortable. I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's been 2 years, and it will, it's been a year. I've wanted to do this show for a year, but it still took me time to get my brain around how to do that and how to present it in a way, again, white comfort and dealing with the fragility that comes along with that. Because when you challenge the status quo, I mean, there's no doubt that my evolution in terms of being more empathetic towards women, towards Black people, towards immigrants, towards the marginalized portions of our society, instead of just doing the same old libertarian show that just tries to protect exactly what I had, instead of getting uncomfortable, there's been reputational damage. There's been somewhat of a diminished amount of listeners to the show. And I wouldn't even say our numbers are pretty much where they were, but it's a different audience than it was a year ago. In coming to a libertarian audience that doesn't want to talk about race, because libertarians don't want to talk about race. If you go on our Facebook page and you talk about race, it is the biggest driver of engagement possible, because everyone tells you to shut up. And it reminds me so much of like watching these civil rights films of like the white people who were in the South helping with MLK's bus boycotts, and the other white people screaming in their faces saying, "Not now, shut up, stop talking about this. You're making me uncomfortable." I mean, I've had to get comfortable with the fact that I'm just going to lose some friends. I'm going to lose some allies in the libertarian space by having these conversations because, oh, you're woke. And, there's discomfort in family. Like, there isn't a white family. If you are progressive on race, there isn't a white person that is an ally that doesn't have a family member that they have tension with right now because they're trying to talk about this stuff. So none of that is like a huge cost, right? But it's uncomfortable. It's discomfort, especially for somebody that wants to be liked.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Harry.
I was gonna say, with Dion talking about like having to share that story, I get that a lot. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and I can do things that are considered predominantly white things. So like, I went to, let's see, I skateboard, I play Dungeons and Dragons, so I go to Gen Con on all the time, and I end up going to all these conventions, and it's sometimes I am the only black person in the room. Okay, it's sometimes it can be incredibly frustrating, but because you have this lived experience, and when something happens also you're out around you, it's very important. Also, what I've also learned is also to point that out. When our Friday table that we do, the walnuts, when we did Liberty and Chill a couple weeks ago, we had that whole moment. We were sitting there talking and discussing OJ Simpson, ironically, and someone just assumed that we were talking about like getting Trump arrested, and they were talking about, and because it was just me, my black self, my cousin who's basically quarter black, and they just projected the whatever they wanted onto us, and and we're just celebrating like, oh, I'm so glad you guys are just together, just this unity, and even like paid our freaking bill at the bar, which whatever, I'm going to spend like $40 there drinking and eating. And if you want to eat that bill, it was this.
So do you want me to cancel the foot washing that Rhinehold and I have planned for the two of you?
Yes, absolutely. I don't need no
man,
white people.
We were going to honor your blackness and subjugate ourselves to you. No, I think Harry, I think back to like the first, like, Wall is different since 2018. And there's a reason it's behind the paywall. When you first came on the show, we made jokes at the expense of you being black, or we had gay co-hosts or female co-hosts, and we were very insensitive to that position that and I think back and I go, I just would cringe if I had to listen to that, and I don't want to, whereas now I'm not going to point that out with a lot of jokes. We can have, as long as you're in on the joke, okay, fine, but like, I felt like in the beginning when you first came on, we were differentiating you instead of making you a part of the group, and I don't know if you perceive that, but like I think back on some of that stuff, and I regret that.
Yeah. I during that time, yes, I always felt like, oh, that's why like I still kept my own podcast and did my own stuff, because it's like I'm not a part of their group. I'm just this add-on. I'm just an add-on to them, which I liked it because I did have fun hanging out with you, and it was awesome. But that part of the group I really never felt like I really belonged. It was just an add-on piece.
Yeah, because those little jokes tell you you're different.
Yep, each time. But it's not that like I fault you, because like I said, like just like I said, you're a good person, and I understood it. And because even when I eventually said like, hey, like when I watched you just go, when someone said, hey, this joke makes me uncomfortable, and you started shutting people down, it's like, oh, he is a good person. If you just explain to him, tell him he's open to it,
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Harry.
I was going to say, like, not everyone at that time was, but yes. Yeah.
Dion, I think that's the thing, when I guess people will avoid the information we're talking about. They'll avoid learning about systemic racism or white privilege or any of these concepts, and they'll flee from it and screech at it,
right?
and throw a fit because they don't want to learn that information, because once they do, they're responsible for something. So people engage in willful ignorance towards this stuff because they don't want to be responsible. And I guess, and I've said to you before, what am I responsible for? Like, what am I supposed to do? Because I've said to you in the past on air, I didn't own slaves. My family wasn't in the South. They fought in the Union. What do I owe you? And I think you've explained to me, like, you owe it to check people. I owe to people what I was already doing, but wasn't really conscious of, like Harry said, when somebody said, I don't like when you say this, and they had the courage to say to me, the leader of our group, I don't like when you do this. And so we stopped. That's like that's the minimum, but like that's the basic thing. Like I think when people hear when they hear this stuff, they think there's something called replacement theory. And if you want to talk about the critical Marxism of the left, let's talk about the replacement theory of the right, which is Charlottesville tiki torches guys saying Jews will not replace us. They will not replace us. If you really sit down and listen to what a lot of these modern segregationists talk about, they're saying, do you want them to replace you? Because it always comes down to quote unquote them, right?
Right.
Notice how often they or them is said, and always ask who's them, who's they, who are you talking about? And just go on Wikipedia and look up replacement theory, learn about it, and then start to watch how much that creeps into right-wing media. And you don't want them to get the leg up because they will replace you and take away your economic opportunity for you and your kids. So it's not what I hear a lot of the black listeners of the Patdown and you and Miss Pat and Harry saying, I want representation in society and equality. And what a lot of these, the right-wing media says is they want subjugation. They want to make you subject to critical Marxism, Dion. I mean, so break that down. Like once I kind of realized like, oh, nobody wants to replace me. They just want you to treat people with empathy and respect. I went, I can do that.
Okay. So here's where that replacement theory comes from. That comes from fear of repercussions for what they are actively doing now. You only fear, well, if we become the minority, well, then you're going to treat us the way we treated you, because it would be only reasonable to think that if you've treated somebody like shit for 400 plus years, and then they all of a sudden got in charge, you would think as you oppress these people that once they got the chance to oppress you, that would be game on, because that's what you would do.
And you do see people who are on the, let's say call them the woke crowd, will say that on Twitter, and then that will be highlighted and screenshotted and amplified on the right saying, look, see, we told you.
Yeah, and that's if black people were out for vengeance and revenge, we wouldn't have waited 400 plus years. So that to me, that is more guilt than anything. Like, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to face up to what I know I've been actively doing to people, and that I'm going to have to reap what I sow. You were talking about losing listeners earlier, and that's part of being an ally is getting battle wounds. You say, how do you help me? You fight on the battlefields that I don't have access to. So you go to a place where I normally cannot go, and then you fight for me. You stand up for me. You open that door for me. You take that billy club for me, so that in the future, when it's my time to go to that space, it's already been prepped, and I can pick up my weapon and shield and fight for myself once I get in there. That's how you help people when you don't have access to black people. So I always hear white people say, well, I didn't own any slaves. What can I do? It's like, you can learn, and then you can change. You can change the status quo for somebody, even if they're not around, so that eventually when it does happen, because it's at some point it's going to happen, we are outbreeding you guys, whether you like it or not. So at some point, we're all going to be this big, light-skinned group of people anyway, because the mixing of the races, and you can't take back black dick and white pussy, I guess. Like, you can't. Once you've had it, you're gonna want it forever.
Harry, thoughts?
Oh man, a couple of things. One, yeah, if black people were really trying to replace and segregate white people, we would have did it when Obama was president. We would have just replaced at that moment. We had the power, could have did it, but we didn't. So you're welcome. All right. But yeah, it's and also Dion's talking about fighting figuratively, picking up weapons figuratively.
Yeah, we don't want to end up in the congressional record in a Trump defense or 20-minute loop of fight.
That was the most ridiculous thing I think I've ever seen.
We're going to talk about the impeachment next week, because It's so much deeper than we like. We did the shows in August, kind of telling you what was going to happen. It all happened, and then it all was tied in a neat bow the last 4 days. And it's like, I think it's the first time a lot of these Republicans have seen some of the footage because they watch right-wing media. And if people watch right-wing media only, if you think CNN is fake news, but you listen to Tim Pool and read the Epic Times, you have no idea what actually happened on January 6th. And people are seeing it and they're going, holy shit. Like Trump tried to kill Congress members and Mike Pence so he could stay in power. And I think this is not over. So we'll talk about it more next week, but it was funny where it was, listen, you can't take Trump's words to mean what they mean. His words have no power, but the leftist media is propagandizing. It's like the cognitive dissonance is always hilarious. And then they go, he said fight, but he didn't mean fight. He meant it, figuratively. And you can't take him out of context. That's not fair. Now here's a 10-minute
video out of context.
Democrat out of context. Just, like, I guess, like
the only thing funnier than that was that they were serious.
We'll talk about cognitive dissonance in a minute. But Harry, what was your second point?
I just wanted to bring up that, I think I lost it.
That's like Dion. That's what drives me, and any one of you guys jump in. But like the cognitive dissonance about all this stuff, like. I always thought Maxine Waters, her rhetoric was wrong, that it was that she's like generally kind of a buffoon and says stuff that like I don't think makes sense. And so my opinion hasn't really changed on that, but Republicans went from where I was to, well, Maxine Waters did it, so we should do exactly what Maxine Waters did and we can get away with it because they did it. It's like, Dion, like the whole like argument that Trump can have his people storm the Capitol is because you guys did it on the left all summer long. It's like the whataboutism on the right is the glue that is holding the right together.
I mean, it's always going to be the false equivalency because that's the place of comfort that they come from. If the people who stormed the Capitol were Black Trump supporters, do you think they would have made it as far as they did? That's what I think is even funnier. Is like just switch their skin color. They're still rioting for the exact same reason.
It would have just been mowed down. It just would have like, oh my god.
Trump would have
there are pictures.
Trump would not have taken 4 hours to get the National Guard there. He would have had it there ready to go.
But there are pictures from like the police presence when they were starting the Black Lives Matter protests, and then the same area of the city and the police presence when they were protesting the masks and the lockdowns, right? Mm-hmm. And there was like hardly any police the second time, but the first time it was inundated with police cars and police with riot gear ready to go, right? And that's kind of the imbalance you see in the thinking inside the systems that people are trying to say doesn't exist.
It's a two-pronged attack. One, it's to show Black people we have power, and it's two, to reassure white people their comfort that we won't ever let them do what you think they're going to do. We've got your. It's that two-pronged attack of showing Black people we are the dominant force. We will check you every single time. And to the white people watching, oh, thank God for that thin blue line. And it's like that thin blue line will fuck you up the second they get the go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And look how much they respected the thin blue line on January 6th.
Exactly.
But Dion, are you trying to invade my suburbs?
No, I would hate to live on the south side of Indiana. Ugh.
Fuck.
I know. South side, gross. But yeah, they don't want you there, but then they want your kid and their sports games. It's awful.
That's to me is what's really hilarious is how many racist people love Black sports.
Mm-hmm.
You hate them on the street, but you'll chill for them in the gym. That doesn't make any sense.
I know.
Well, you talk about culture vulture and that concept.
Well, I mean, so Bo Derek is a classic example. She put braids in her hair, and everybody was like, "Oh, she's so sexy." And it's like Black women have been wearing braids in their hair for years, and y'all tell us that we need to cut our hair, make it short, and only thugs wear braids, but She gets the exact same style, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this is so hot. We should all try this. And it's like, wait a minute, motherfucker, we've been trying to just be who we are, and you tell us, that this makes you feel uncomfortable. But the second a white person does it, it's okay. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. That's and then that toxic stuff also gets into young black people's like heads. Like there's for the longest time, like I didn't want braids in my head because like I was like, well, I want to become a professional. I cannot put braids in my head. I don't do that. It's like, and it was so toxic to unlearn that as myself as a younger when I was younger. It's like no one's gonna hire me with braids. I can't have braids. I've got to make sure my hair is short. They won't hire me. It's like, oh heck no, I've got tons of jobs with braids and even with my freaking afro out. No one cares. It's because and the jobs that wouldn't hire me with my afro or with my braids, I don't want those jobs. I don't want to work for those people.
So it sounds like societally you're not allowed to self-actualize in the way that you want to live your life because
it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yep. The other thing is which is just also weird from living out here now is my wife's just started another job, and full disclosure, she's a white woman. All right. Nice. And so she's sitting at her job and she goes to sit there, brand new area, sit there, and she is just inundated with all these white people thinking it's okay and just starts talking and saying some of the most racist stuff she's ever heard. It just goes, oh my God.
You guys don't, I mean, but you don't know what people say when you're not around. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I think everything in life is, I will tell somebody, this person's not a nice person. And they'll go, no, you don't know them. Like, I know them. They're the greatest person. I'm like, no, but you're on the opposite side. Like, there's people in the movement, right, where it's like, no, they're not nice to me. They're really not good people. Oh, but I know them. I work with them. They're great. You don't understand. Like you're
on their bad side.
You're the problem because you're making an issue with them. And if you just were nice to them, then you'd get along with them. And I go, no, you really don't understand. This person treats people they don't like shit. Well, you just don't understand. You just need to stop being a problem. And then it'll like, I find that like the test of character is how you treat people that you don't like or that have no power or, I think that's where it comes down, where it kind of helped me connect some of this stuff is like, I don't know what it's like to be Dion or Harry, but I know my white friends treat me really well, my white male friends, but when they're alone with my female friends say they make them feel horrible or do terrible things to them. So this person's not a nice person. Like, I'll never forget, like we had one co-host who said like, I sit at my desk and I don't go to the bathroom because I don't want everyone to stare at my ass. So I hold my pee all day. So this girl is miserable all day long because other men want to make her feel awful with like basically dehumanize her, right? She felt dehumanized. She felt like she was a sex toy. And so she had to be uncomfortable for their sake. But I'm sure all those guys think, oh, well, we're just great guys. Like, Tim's great. I love Joe. But she thinks he's a piece of shit because Joe treats this girl like shit, right? So I guess, when other people tell you that someone's a problem and they're not a problem to you, it's because you're not the thing they have a problem with. I don't know if I'm making sense, Dion. Help me.
So... like as I said on our now that's debatable. Once you get information, it's your job to do something with that information. Like information makes you grow, and so if this woman pointed out that, hey, I don't like this, you guys staring at my ass, she brings that to everyone's attention, and then everybody instantly gets defensive and doesn't put themselves in her shoes. Then now we all know that they are the problem. She shouldn't have to hold her pee all day in order to get through her day because she doesn't want people looking at her ass. Like, that is a problem. And if she speaks on that and no one changes it, then you have your answer. That's the new information. Oh, so I'm making someone uncomfortable with my behavior. It's incumbent upon me to change my behavior. And if I'm not willing to do that, then I don't have the right to claim that I'm a good person. You just don't have that right. You can still be the asshole who looks at her ass and makes her feel like shit, but you have to own that. And that's what my biggest issue with people is they don't own the things that they are responsible for. So I can't figure out how to get people to see that without shutting them down. Like that's where I'm trying to learn how do I bring this person into this new information that they have, and how do I get them to understand, like, this is what you should be looking for. These are the things that you do that you don't recognize that you do, not necessarily doing it intentionally, because I don't think every single time it's intentional. But at the same time, once you find out that this makes somebody uncomfortable, you have to figure out how to get rid of that so that they can be comfortable, because you would want that same thing for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, Harry, your wife going into that space where obviously if you were there, they would have a different attitude.
Mm-hmm.
But she has the ability to go into that space and check them and check their behavior and go, hey, this isn't acceptable. And I mean, I don't know if she did or not, but like that's an example of how to solve this problem and move on.
My wife is very introverted and not much for trying that confrontation. So she mostly just kind of looked at them and was like,
unless she wants me to smoke weed, because she looked at one former co-host and she goes, "Smoke the doobie, pussy." It was the softest, highest pitched voice. She's the nicest lady, and she just looks at one of the "Smoke the weed, pussy." Fully peer pressured this girl.
Well, the fun thing too is that she's got the moment now where she can be there for a couple of weeks, just let them keep going, and then put up the picture of Harry, or have Harry come by and meet with her, pick her up, and see the look on their faces when they go, "We've been saying all this for how long?" And I don't know, maybe that's a way of doing it as well, but.
She mostly just like looks at the she just kind of gets up and like leaves when she does it, and just that's all she does. She doesn't feel comfortable doing that, and I don't know how to like empower her so she feels comfortable doing that, but because it's also not in her personality type to do that. So
that's you can't. I don't begrudge people who would rather not fight that fight. I completely understand it, but at the same time, those women are never going to change. It's never going to stop unless it's addressed, and how it's addressed is up for discussion. But at some point, it needs to be addressed. I'm pretty sure if those women knew that Harry was black, that they would definitely not be offering up their opinions on black people the way that they do. So.
But it would only be in front of her. They would still do it when she's in the room. You know what I'm saying? It's not
right.
Getting them to be aware of what's happening. It's a way for them to say, okay, I don't feel comfortable now because of this situation, but it doesn't stop the way they view things.
But
that's the worrisome part.
Yeah, and so in that moment, the moment she exposes them for who they are, they have a reckoning, right? They now have the information that, oh shit, I've outed myself to somebody. Now I have to deal with it. And how they choose to deal with it, obviously, will be up to them. But hopefully, if they're, willing to grow and learn, then they would take a second to maybe have a conversation with somebody that doesn't look like them.
Yeah. I don't think they're willing to learn. They're from Newcastle, that town.
Yeah, but I think my naivete is that everybody has a chance to learn, but I've sort of watched over the last couple of years just going, I guess if people listen to this show and they go, wow, he's really become like anti-conservative, anti-Republican. It's not that I still hold the same principles and values that I had 4 years ago, 2 years ago, on policy, right? It's just that when people will invent things to remain willfully ignorant instead of just having a conversation or dealing with a problem or examining themselves because they want to maintain control. I can't lose control. Like I have a hard time watching manipulators like Trump manipulate people, and people are choosing to be manipulated and believe insane things to kind of stay where they're at instead of growing, and then treating other people terribly to keep them in. And one example of this is the impeachment trial, right? And it kind of goes Dion to the Dave Chappelle convo on SNL that we had off air. Why impeach him? you're just going to make things worse. This isn't unity. And right after the election, Dave Chappelle went on SNL and essentially called a lot of rural people like meth heads, right? And I said to Dion, I go, man, this just isn't the time. This isn't the place. Like, this is just going to inflame people. Like, the tensions are really high. Why now? Why now? Why now? Which is such a common refrain that Martin Luther King back in 1963 wrote a book, like why we must, I forget what it's called, but it basically was answering the question of we can't wait. Why we can't wait, I think is the name of the book. Dion, that refrain of we can't have this conversation now, let's wait because you'll make these violent people be violent is such a shitty way to run a country.
Yeah, I mean, if you wait till you're comfortable to fight a revolution, you're never going to fight a revolution. So you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to go into that space where you're not going to be comfortable. You can't grow unless you move, right? You got to go. So you got to go to your bones don't stay the same size when you're a kid they are as an adult. Like, you have growing pains. Like, so part of growing is moving on to a place where you're not comfortable. At some point, you're going to have a conversation where you're not comfortable. Nothing happens when you aren't actively trying to change them. So when people say, oh, well, let's wait. Well, wait for why wait? Because you're not comfortable? That's the only reason, because you're not comfortable? Well, when are you ever going to be comfortable with the conversation that you don't want to have?
So what are the limits to all this? Because when you look at some of the conversation around what's called cancel culture now broadly, which started as like a kid tweets the N-word in elementary school and can't go to Harvard, right? Like that. All right. I get, you were 13 when you tweeted that horrible thing. You've grown, you're different, right? I'm on board. If you tweet something 15 years ago and you lose your job in 2021 at a newspaper in Iowa. All right. But we've gotten into this place where the right specifically, but a lot of media is transgressive, where we know where the limits are and we're going to do the exact opposite of the bounds of good taste because we want to be intentionally inflammatory. And then when people try to enforce the boundaries, we cry victim. You go, well, like, you made the choice to do that show that way or post that meme or do this thing that you knew was going to be offensive because your audience was going to love it. That's not cancel culture. Those are called consequences. But then there is, like, I think somewhat of an argument that the right in this country, that conservatives suffer the consequences of being moved off of social media, of moved out of media at a greater pace than people who are on the left. Right politicians get punished. Like, look at how Republican politicians are treated versus Andrew Cuomo. I mean, what are your opinions on that, Dion? I mean, do you see that do you acknowledge that point or do you reject that?
So social media, there are more Democrats than there are Republicans. So of course they're going to get away with more because there's more people of like mind. And so you're less likely to check those people who are like you. And that's what part of being a good person is, you got to check even the people who in your group who need to be checked, regardless of whether they're in your group or not. Like, you need to check people who do the wrong thing. So when I see Republicans talk about they're getting canceled, well, I'm like, your behavior is causing the cancellation. Like, what for me, when I hear somebody say, oh, you're on the left, that comes to social it's the way society operates that, I give you the proper pronouns that you want because that's what you want, because it doesn't cost me anything to call you a they or a them or a she, he, whatever. It does. I have no problem with that. And then you go to the right side and they're like, well, why do I have to change the way I talk to make this person feel comfortable? It's like, because it doesn't cost you anything and you're not losing anything. This person would feel better if you did that. And instead of being an asshole about it, you call them what they want to be called. Well, where does that stop? It stops right there. That's the only thing they're asking for. They want to be treated like everyone else. And in order for that to happen, you have to call them whatever pronoun that they ask you to call them. Like, that's not a big deal. We can talk about policy as far as government, but at the end of the day, everybody wants to be comfortable in society with who they are. And I think a lot of the problem on the right is they would rather themselves be comfortable than everybody else. And so that's where the fight is.
I mean, Rhinehold, do you kind of, I mean, you're the more, well, you're a socialist basically. But when it comes to cancel culture, you're one of the more skeptical people that I know of it all. Like, where's the limits to this? What's the boundaries?
Well, I think the boundaries have to be pushed through societal limits, right? So it's going to be a backlash against it. I don't think there are people talking about, we need laws and it's like, no, you're missing the entire point, right? So society moves and changes throughout history. It always has, it always will. And there's people who push the boundaries, and there's people who try to pull back on society to keep it from going too far. And you've got this constant tug of war. Cancel culture, or canceling somebody, is not a new thing. It has been going on for generations, right? It's just that different people were in charge of who was canceling who, right? And now those people who are,
it was Tipper Gore and Republicans hauling in Twisted Sister,
right? Majority, there were groups that were telling radio stations they couldn't play a list of songs, or they were going to be boycotted. And that's cancel culture, right? As we hear about it today, it's always gone on, right? So now it's just the people who are kind of pushing society a little bit more right now aren't the conservatives, it's the liberals. So the conservatives who were once doing this are now feeling very uncomfortable with the repercussions of all of that. But at the end of the day, you make a decision when you say these things. Like, if you choose to put something out there and it's not well received or wrong, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "I didn't realize," or please forgive me, it was a mistake," they get defensive. They try to double down, and that just makes things worse.
Well, that's what happened with y'all. Like, Cliff so there's this libertarian student group, and the head of it was accused of improprieties. And instead of handling it gracefully, went on Twitter and went full Trump and said, "This is all a lie. Everybody's lying. It's not happening." And that's what pissed everybody off. And all the responsible voices in the libertarian movement went, "Nope, time for an investigation. I don't care if he's on my team. We need to look into this." Because, like, instead of handling other people's claims with grace and respect, it was handled with an arrogance, a pushback, that, like, lack of shame. That's when everybody kind of went, "All right, nah, I don't like that. You're not getting away with that." I mean, Harry, go ahead.
The other thing about cancel culture too, I wanted to say was we keep talking about cancel culture and these people getting canceled. When you've got people like Mel Gibson, the famous example of somebody who was canceled, yet is now up for awards, Oscars. He's got his career back because he went out and he did the work to show that he was sorry for some of the things he had done, right? And he got back into good graces. So Robert Downey Jr. was going through a whole horrible situation, right, where he was waking up on people's lawns from taking too many drugs, and he was almost ostracized from that community. And now he's a huge star. Think of all the people who have been canceled over the years who are still working, they're still making money, they're still doing their things, right? Louis C.K., he's out doing comedy again. He's not. He took some
Michael Vick.
Don't even. My wife would kill me if we started talking about Michael.
Yeah, well,
Vick.
I think that's what we talk about. What we talk a lot about here is the capacity for change, grace, mercy. Like, you have to allow for people to be human, and you have to meet them where they're at and try to bring them to a better space. It's but there has to come a point where you just say, like, this person's just an asshole. He wants to be an asshole. Like, that's where I kind of break with a lot of the right, in that liberty is not about the right to do whatever you want, treat everyone the way you want, use the government to treat others you don't like, to keep your economic position, and suffer no consequences for any of it. Like, there are consequences to actions. There are, like, even in a purely anarchist society, you're going to still have to have human relations and deal with people, and grace and mercy are going to be a part of that. And I think it concerns people when there isn't a path to restoration, which I think is an incredibly important piece that often gets missed. It's like, no, because you did this Karen thing in the park, you're trash and your life is over, and go over here, without some sort of path to restoration. I think the right doesn't do themselves any favor by trying to freak people, like just say, see, they're coming to get you. They're coming to get you. Instead of being part of the discussion to say, what's the path to restoration for this person? And the left does it too. If you look at left Twitter in some of these cultural issues, there's a lot of people who just go, I'm not fucking with you. Bye. Hope you die. Literally, I mean, hope you die. And I just think comes a point where everybody has to meet somewhere in the middle and go, all right, you're a trash person, but you're our trash person. Let's walk you through that. I mean, Dion, you're one of the things I respect about you is you're very principled, you're usually right, and you're very pointed about it. And you just say, no, this is how it is. And I'm much more of a diplomat, I guess. And I try to say, no, that's okay. Listen, this Klan's member, we can work through this with him. And you're like, no, fuck him, burn him at the stake. But I mean, so where do we meet in the middle? How do we deal with some of this stuff? Because there's a lot of people who are listening to this going, I have a right to be a racist, to live in a racist society and be a racist. And who are you to tell me that I can't believe certain things?
And to that, I would say, I'm not trying to change your mind. I can't change your mind. Only you can change your mind. I can make it so that what goes on in your mind makes you uncomfortable in public spaces. I can't control what goes on in your house, but I can tell you that the majority of people want to be comfortable in public. And we can't be comfortable with racist ideologies, transphobic ideologies. You're not going to be comfortable in public spaces. No one should have to deal with the hate of someone else. Like in public, that's for everyone. So you don't get to dominate that space with anything but civility. That's what should reign in public spaces. So I'm not trying to change a racist person's mind. I'm trying to make a racist person understand that they're racist. And what they do with that information is on them. At that point, once I've shown you who you are, it's on you to change if you want to or not. I can't control that. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to really care as long as you're not in a position of power to control my life in any other type of way. What do I care if you hate me based on my skin color? I don't give a shit. That it's not going to affect me as long as you're not my boss. So at the end of the day, I think exposing people to who they actually are as people will be the change that we're all looking for. When you really find out who it is, do you really hold the quote unquote values that you espouse to everyone? Do you actually hold those, or is that just something that you say to make yourself feel comfortable? When you face the opposition to everything that you know, you find out exactly who you are. And it's like, oh, I can't lie to myself anymore, or I can keep lying to myself, but I have to know that I'm lying to myself. And that's where the change actually comes from. You talk about grace and mercy. I don't give people the opportunity to screw me twice. Like if you screw me over and you willingly screw me over and you knowingly screw me over, then I accept you for who you are at that moment. And that's who you're going to be until I see you change. And even if I do see you change, chances are I'm still not going to want to deal with you because of that past scar that's never going to go away. So I won't actively go out of my way to make your life harder. But at the same time, you're not coming to my barbecue. I'm not sending you invite to my wedding. Like you go live your life. I'm glad that you've made a change, but I'm cool.
So as we move from a center right to a center left country, where is the space for Republicans, if that makes sense? Like, is there any legitimate claim that conservatives are victims of, like, they're being treated like minorities, basically? Is there any truth to that? Is there any space for all that?
What are you conserving? What's to conserve? The old way of doing things that made people feel like shit? What are you conserving? I don't understand that. Tell me what you're trying to conserve. If it's money, then what does that have to do with policy? Just don't spend your money. So like, Explain that to me.
Rhinehold.
Well, I mean, part of the problem you get into is when you say left center and right center is that what do those really mean, right? So when we talk about, I get called a lefty, commie, blah, 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 all that stuff all the time, even though I'm down the middle of the road libertarian. Right down. Matter of fact, I'm a little bit on the right according to the charts, whatever. But because I see people with empathy and I understand, I try to understand what they're going through, and I concern myself with making sure that everybody's rights are protected, not just mine or my tribe's, then I get called a leftist. So is that part of leftist society, is just having that empathy? And what does that say about the right side of the political aisle if that's not part of it, right? If that's what's differentiating people between left and right? So that's really the problem I have with some of these labels and some of this thinking, is that it's really still down to tribes against each other and not and putting up blocks to seeing what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, to what is being conserved. When I see the meme I see most often is the conversation we had today is the Trojan horse for socialism. That if you become woke on race, as they say, then you're going to end up like Bernie Sanders,
who's a millionaire.
Right.
There's a lot worse people to be than Bernie Sanders. I don't that doesn't make any sense.
Go ahead.
It would be worse to be Bernie Sanders because it's Vermont. Have you ever been to Vermont?
I have. I love Vermont.
Vermont sucks. New Hampshire's so much better than Vermont. So much better. So much nicer. You get a beach. Okay, you get a beach. What does Vermont got? Chickens, a library.
They have a great comedy club, the Vermont Comedy Club. It's fantastic.
I think a lot of it is people make the mistake of tying politics to just basic human decency and treating other people like they're human beings. And that's where I separate it. I go, Dion and I can be on the opposite sides of, healthcare, right? Like we both want the same thing. We want people to have, every single person to have totally affordable healthcare. Right? We just have different ways of getting there because human beings are human beings and deserve to be taken care of. Like the value that we are consistent on is we both agree that human beings are worth being cared for. All human beings, regardless of race, color, creed, all that good stuff. That's where I think a lot of the right goes wrong, is like they're trying to tie it to politics when the conversation we're having today is not about politics. It's just about right and wrong and basic decency and treating people well. It's not a Trojan horse to usher in AOC style government. It's
nothing we talked about today or discussed is going and saying government must mandate this, or you're not legally allowed to do X, Y, or Z. We're just talking about what people should be doing as human beings, as self-aware, self-actualized, empathetic human beings. And I think most people are that. It's just that they have their own self-fears, their self-doubts, their own self-hatreds that are driving them to block that empathetic feelings that they have for other people, right? And I think that's where a lot of this still resides. Now, 200 years ago, maybe there was a different case to be made. People were just ignorant and thought that that Black people were actually different species or different people. We know now that there's no such thing as race, really. So to continue to be that kind of mindset these days is really driven more from a self-hatred situation where you're looking at other differences in other people to try to say that makes them less than me, so now I feel better about myself, right? And I don't know how to combat that really, other than just try to get information out and get people to just admit that these things are happening and it is a bad thing, and we would like to make our society better. We should always be trying to get better as a society. And
sounds like communism to me.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You got churches trying to protect the institutions, but the problem is that some of these institutions really need to change because they're still doing things the wrong way.
You know
and
what?
And that's why it gets me about libertarians who consider themselves like paleo libertarians is like you're trying to preserve institutions, but these are the institutions that libertarians historically has been fighting against.
Mhm.
And making and not necessarily tearing down, but to make them better. So I,
Well,
it's
a lot of paleos view that the last two conservative institutions in the country are the military and the police.
Oof.
I mean, Harry, why did you say oof?
Oof. So like the violent boot is what they want,
Militarism, yeah.
That's
and the militarism. Why?
Like
to go back to what Dion said, to make sure that they're in power and you're not.
Correct. Yeah. One thing I'm going to put out to my empathy to guard up some of the conservative and Republican buddy is I think it's unfair to attack them based on their name of saying conserve. What are they conserving? To them, they feel like they're just conserving the Constitution and their time way of life. I think they have more into it, and majority of conservatives you talk to, they're not talking about trying to preserve racism and stuff like that. That I think that's a very unfair way to categorize conservatives.
Yeah, like Dale says on conserving things, I think folks a lot of the time are trying to conserve the actual mechanisms and rule of law outlined in the Constitution.
Stop right there. Okay, the mechanisms and rule of law. Mechanically, the Constitution is racist as shit. Like the systemic racism is built into the Constitution. So that in and of itself tells me all I need to know. That is a system put in place based off what you look like. It wasn't until you amended the Constitution that people actually had rights and shit. So that in and of itself should tell you all you need to know. You're trying to conserve what? The status quo. The status quo doesn't work for everybody. And that's the position that we should be trying to fix. It's like, oh, you just want to conserve the way things were that worked for a certain group of people instead of everybody. You can't say that document that all men are created equal and own people at the same time. Like, you don't get to do that. So why in 2021 are we looking at this old ass piece of paper as if it's gospel when in actuality it has been the sole thing that has allowed this system of injustice to occur? Well, it's in the Constitution. Like, yeah, well, the Constitution it's not what you think it is for everybody.
Yeah, you could put that, but that's not. It's but to them, it is their to a lot of conservatives. I will say to some of it is their gospel, and I think just completely attacking it and going with that is one disingenuous.
I'd argue. I mean, yes and no, Dion. I mean, the Constitution, when it was founded, was the first democracy in the modern era, and the rule of law was
democracy for who?
For the white power at the time, right?
Okay.
But what you've seen since then is the expansion of rights for a myriad of groups, especially in the last 100 years.
After how many people died? They didn't give that up willingly. It was a fight. Every change was a fight. And that's the point. That document made the fight happen. Right. Because they used it as a shield. Well, this is a piece of paper that we all think is great. And it's like, no, that piece of paper is not great for everybody. So why are you holding on to it so dearly? Because that's all you know. And when you get new information and you're like, oh, no, that's not true because my life hasn't been that. Well, your life is not everybody else's life, and you need to accept that. That's what's frustrating to me about when I hear people say conservatism, because like in my mind, all you're trying to do is conserve your position within that document. You're not thinking about the rest of the people that you live with. It's like it's only about you, and it's a selfish way of thinking. Like if you're not trying to help the people, this is America, right? We're all Americans. Right. So wouldn't it be awesome if all Americans were good at something? If all Americans were healthy? How much better would our country be if everybody wasn't being mistreated and denigrated for what they look like? It's not like we did something to earn the position that we're in. It's just we look different. Like that in and of itself is a problem. And this document that, well, this all people are created equal, but we're not. Well, there's no such thing as racism anymore because we signed a law. I'm like, oh, so that just undid 250 years of trauma? Oh, well, why didn't we do that sooner? Like, no, it doesn't go away just because you make it law. people take it into their home. Like if that's your founding document, if that's your base, that's your center, that's your rock, then you need to examine that, what that actually means, what comes with that.
Well, it's not really like the rock. It's more of like if you think about it as a framework, and as it's shown, yes, people have died. People died building that Constitution, and people have died defending it, and also helped changing it. It is that document has changed in the past to basically respect people's rights. Didn't give anyone any rights, just more of respecting the natural rights that you do have, and it's such a let's say like a milestone just for human achievement, because before that it was just divine rights of kings. We're talking about just the absurd of idea just to say that no, you who have no nobility can own land and can do what you say on your own land. That was a huge building block to allow to the society that most people are seeing today, even to take down the monarchy in Europe.
Well, part of the problem is I think a lot of people look to the Constitution as, oh, we just want to protect the Constitution. But they're really, I think, in their mind thinking is that we want to support and defend the Age of Enlightenment and the ideas that were being discussed then and changing and transforming society. We've never fully implemented that ideal. I think we want to try to get there. And I think some people who consider themselves conservatives are more focused on protecting that ideal and not necessarily, and they think the institutions are there to do that when they're not. The idea is something that we've never put in place. So there's no golden age, and that's a part of the problem with fascist propaganda. That if you do study that type of thing, that one of the requirements to do, one of the things they do is try to build everybody into thinking that there was a golden age where things were good. And now it's being changed, and these people are taking it away from us. It's never it almost never actually ever existed. Just people believe that it did. But if you go back and look at it, it wasn't that great. It wasn't what we envisioned with the Age of Enlightenment and the ideas of that. And that's what I try to fight for, is try to get that. So like Thomas Jefferson's original Declaration of Independence was closer to kind of that idea and putting it down on paper than anything else was. But then that got cut up and changed and everything else because too many people were afraid of losing their lifestyle. And what about these people? And everybody kind of put their own thing in there and muddied it up. So we never had a good implementation of the idea that the best government is one that just that protects people from each other, but otherwise lets them live their lives as they want. Right.
Yeah, and those same conservatives that are upset at the way Dion describes you, that's your guys' best messaging. That you guys are trying to talk about this bedrock of the arguments that are just like, no, trying to use that document to give people more freedom. This is how people think when you say that word, and it's more they need to work on that type of messaging. You know, they always talk about like, well, we're trying to conserve. Like, well, tell them what you're trying to conserve and like why you want to open up more freedom. You know, like the same argument that the right always talks about, like being for the like the military industrial complex, or just doing like being against the drug or going for the drug war. It's like, listen, how is that? Like, if you really like respect the Constitution, then you're not for the drug war. You don't want these ADF crap, you know, the DEA. This is the junk, you know, of totalitarian like control, that if you actually cared about that document or the spirit of that document, you wouldn't want nowhere near it. You know, so you end up pushing out that mixed message. So, you know,
and there's bad messaging
understand
on both sides here too, because there are people who, when they hear the phrase white privilege, they immediately think that they're being told that they've had it easy in life because of blah, blah, blah. And it's not. Everybody's had their own journey and everybody's got their own thing. So it's just that I want to eliminate all the things that we can eliminate. And one of those things is being treated differently because of things you have no control over, right? You know, how you look, you know, any of that stuff. So
sexual orientation.
Sexual orientation. You shouldn't, let's get rid of that, because life is already hard enough for everybody. So why do we want to make it worse?
In general is bad.
Yeah. Right. So, but the problem is that the language that we use to try to describe that white privilege immediately sets off people who are already defensive. Right. So I think there's a problem with messaging. Like another one was defund the police. Nobody was really saying defund the police completely, like get rid of the police. And that's what the people took it to mean. It was like, no, let's let other non-police organizations take care of some of the stuff that the police are doing, so we can let them focus on the one thing that they should be doing.
Right. So
it's a problem with communication, I think, and labeling and messaging.
It's
that
fear.
Really needs to be fixed.
It's a fear behind the idea of defund the police. I'm afraid that if the police don't have money now, that my life's going to be in jeopardy. It's a fear.
Right.
The whole white privilege thing, I think, is really, really funny because I played poker in Lebanon back before the pandemic hit. I used to play poker.
For those who don't know, Lebanon is northern central Indiana, and white as me.
It's a super white town. And I played poker at the American Legion. So there's a lot of.
Is it like reverse Animal House when you walk in, the record goes?
At first, I thought that's what it was going to be. I got invited there by a friend on Facebook. He's like, we play poker. I was looking for a place to play poker because I love playing poker. So I go there and I see the stereotypical aspects of white people. I'm like, oh, there's a guy with skull over there, a cowboy boot hat guy over there. And in my mind, I'm thinking, just be prepared. And it wasn't until I actually got to know these people and talk to these people and play with these people that they're like everybody else. Now, they don't have a lot of access to black people, and I was that one black person. And thankfully, I'm the type of black person that's not going to I'm going to give you the opportunity to learn from me if that's what you choose. I'm not going to initiate it, but if you start a conversation, I will talk to you. And so I have a really, really good friend now, thank God, that he didn't know about it. It was kind of like you, Chris. He didn't know what I went through. And through playing cards and talking to each other, we become close because he is a good person and he just didn't know. So when we talk about white privilege, he goes, I'm a white guy, but I've had to work hard my whole life. I go, that's not the privilege that we're talking about. What we're talking about is the obstacles that you don't face based on what you look like. White privilege isn't, oh, your life is grand and easy. It's, oh, your life is not harder than it has to be because of what you look like. And that's what black people suffer, is our black skin makes our life harder based off what we look like, not who we are as people.
But you had a black president. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and look how long that took, and look how hard we had to fight for it. Like,
yeah, I was talking to somebody, the nonprofit show Now Hear This, and it wasn't on air, but I need to find somebody to kind of speak to it. The housing discrimination that still goes on in the realty industry towards keeping black people out of certain neighborhoods is not that much different than it was 50 years ago. And they were just meticulously walking through all of these different things. And I was like, oh, I thought it was way better than it used to be. And they're like, not at all. It is still hard to get into certain neighborhoods if you are a black person. Like, fuck. Okay.
And that's fear driven. It's all fear driven because you don't understand that black people are the exact same. We're the exact same. We want the exact same things. The exact same things.
That's why Harry, on his housing documentation to get into the town he lives in, it was Harry Miles Standish Price. Third Junior Esquire.
Yeah. I have a very white sounding full name, so I just want to put it all down on document, and have a very white credit score, so it's easy for me to get a house where I want it.
That's before you came on. I said, would it be funny if I introduced you as Harry Price? Since you weren't there, and Dion goes, no, and I don't have his kind of money.
I told him, Harry, I said, that would offend Harry if he had my bank account. He would be very offended by that.
No, I'm sure we have close to the same bank account.
No, I guarantee we don't.
No. The poker, the online gambling, no.
You are doing much better than me, Harry. Much better than me.
All right, let's get final thoughts. Rhinehold, Harry, you go first. Show Dion how it's done. But Rhinehold, final thoughts for the episode.
Final thoughts is just that my biggest concern with, kind of like the returning community or just society in general is that we really need to come to a point where we can, as a group, see what's going on and at least admit that things are the way they are, right? And not reject it out of hand. And that's what I hate the most about the phrase wokeism, is because it's a phrase designed to keep people ignorant.
It's a trivialization. There's a lot of trivialization and marginalizing of ideas and people that talk about certain issues to keep other people away from engaging in those ideas.
The other thing would be white knighting. What, some people would say what we do is white knighting, and because we're trying to interject and try to make it's all a mess, and it's all language designed to keep people, in my opinion, ignorant. So what we can do to fight that, I don't know, but I think we should really work towards it.
Harry?
One thing I think we also talked about, like having people having the road back. I like to bring up Daryl Davis, the black man who got 200 KKK members to like throw away their hoods and stop, and left the Klan. Having those conversations with those people and be able to give them that road back. It's really important. It's so important that it was even brought up in The Art of War. Like when you go to fight someone, you have to give them the ability to surrender and to say no, because you have to. Putting someone on death ground makes them can get very violent, or even if they perceive they're on death ground, they act in weird and impractical ways, and things can be torn down and hurt. Let's see. The other thing I also want to talk about is to help Dion out. Every time he also talked about fighting or anything, or even revolution, those are peaceful ones. Okay, don't want him to get on. Like, you're right. We don't want him to get on some cut tracks. So, the one time he comes on here and he just gets cut up, and it's
violent black man just being violent all over the place. Mr. Violence over here, Dion Curry.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I've got.
Dion, final thoughts and shameless self-promotion. Where can people follow you, and final thoughts?
All right. So my final thoughts are on Black history, on the word Black itself. Research the negativity in that word, where it comes from, why you feel the way you feel when you hear it. Research the negative aspects of all the things that make you feel uncomfortable. Find out why you feel uncomfortable when you hear woke, why you hear defund the police, what makes you uncomfortable about these things. You need to find the origins of that so you can start to heal that process. A lot of people don't look at the reasons why they think what they think. And I think that's very important. If these kids and these parents in Utah didn't want their kids to learn Black history, they need to investigate as to why they feel that way. Then they have a choice to make. Again, Daryl Davis did a great job. I'm glad you brought him up, Harry, of reforming these Klans members. But that's not the life that I want to live. I don't care. I couldn't do that. I don't care to change your mind. I want you to change your mind. I just want you to know who you are. Like, I will accept you for who you say you are, but I will explain to you why I think you are the way you are, and then you'll have to deal with it. As long as it's not affecting my life financially or physically, I don't care. You're not in charge of me. I don't care how you feel. So that's what I would encourage everyone. Just be ready to accept who you are and what you are and the reasons why you are the way you are. Be ready to accept that. So once you accept it, you can actually change it. You can't change it until you accept it. You can't, what do they say? You don't know you have a problem until you acknowledge the problem. So if you want to find me, I do 3 podcasts. Now That's Debatable. It's on all podcast outlets. It comes out every Wednesday. We do a Facebook Live show every Monday night at 9 p.m. I do a podcast with a fellow comedian, BT, called Sorry We're Canceled. That's out on all podcast outlets. That drops every Tuesday. And I also do the Patdown with Chris Spangle and Miss Pat
every Tuesday. I would recommend the book, The New Jim Crow. I mean, if you want to start, have a conversation. If you got a black friend in your life, start there. I mean, that's where I started with Harry and then Dion, and Abdul's my black friend, but that didn't really count. And then
he's kind of establishment though.
My oldest brother hates him with a passion.
He loves to troll. I learned everything from him. The New Jim Crow is a good place to start if you want to kind of learn more about the systemic racism piece and sentencing and policing. It's a really solid book. I think we're in a moment where I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of Thucydides trap. So as one great power is fading and another great power is rising, they clash. And so I forget the guy who Graham Allison, I think, wrote the book. He's a Harvard professor, and his premise is America versus China. And as America is starting to wane and China is starting to rise, well, they go to war because Athens and Sparta, as Sparta was declining and Athens was rising, they fought wars against each other. And so there's this principle in history where most of the time there's conflict. And I think we're in a moment of cultural Thucydides trap as the white-centric culture is fading and multiculturalism in America is starting to rise. You're starting to see these culture clashes. And it's not going to stop because like we said, as whiteness starts to fade more and more, because millennials are like 40% multi-ethnic. That's the word. 40% multi-ethnic. It's even higher in Gen Z. So it's just that the racial lines are getting blurred, but there's some people who are just hell-bent on keeping those racial lines in place. They've already lost. So just get comfortable with these conversations, because it doesn't matter what you do. The demographics are not on your side. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation. If you found it useful, please share it with your friends. Thank you, Dion, for coming on the show. I'll see you at 1:00. Sounds good to me. Thanks for having me. I had to take myself out of the chat because Miss Pat called 3 times. Hey, when are we doing the podcast? 1:00. You didn't tell me that. I said, I thought Dion told you that. That's what I did. She goes, no, he didn't. And you didn't tell. You didn't. He
1:00 was her idea. She said 1:00.
So yeah, and we're talking about 3:30 on Monday too. Before I forget. But anyways, yeah, that's just it's so fun to get together with Miss Pat and Dion and have those conversations. I'd love for you to check out the Patdown. It is not all these heavy conversations. We probably have like 3 of these a year now, but most of it's just so fun to do. So it's a great comedy podcast. If you want to just check that out, be ever grateful. Harry, Rhinehold, thanks for joining us. All right, I'll just go fuck myself. Thank you so much for listening to the Chris Spangle Show, and we will see you again on Tuesday.